When planning out this project to revisit the Switch era, Pokemon was both the series I dreaded talking about and had the most interest in diving into. Pokemon has been an unequivocal success on Switch. The main series has sold nearly 100 million units, while both Scarlet and Violet and Sword and Shield have sold more than any entry in any generation of Pokemon other than Gen 1. This video series isn't about those sales, but it's important to note that despite all the noise surrounding nearly every Pokemon release on Switch, and there has been a lot of noise, Pokemon has been a runaway commercial success on this system. Critically, it's been a very different story. Pokemon has always been a handheld series. Through the entirety of its history, up to the 2018 release of Pokemon Let's Go Eevee and Let's Go Pikachu, every mainline Pokemon entry was released on a handheld device. As a result, every Pokemon game was scaled to the power of the Game Boy, or the GBA, or the DS, or the 3DS. The 3DS era was something of a holding pattern for Pokemon, a period where the series probably should have begun to take strides towards something new, but had neither the hardware power nor the desire to do so. Sun and Moon took small steps toward beginning to upend the traditional structure, but not radical ones. The Switch era brought a different set of expectations. While the Switch is also still a handheld, it also meant this would be the first generation of Pokemon games built for a home console system, in HD, something Game Freak had very little experience doing, especially on the scale required for a Pokemon game. So let's take a look at how that great big leap ended up going. Pokemon Let's Go Pikachu and Eevee was such a straightforward slam dunk idea. Translate the cultural phenomenon that was Pokemon Go into something that bridges those mobile players into the console ecosystem, while holding on to the core of what makes Pokemon games so special in their own right. Going for a Gen 1 remake, Pokemon Yellow to be precise, was just as much a no-brainer. Leverage the awareness of Pokemon's most well-known era, while also using the simple structure of what is ultimately a Game Boy game to get your feet wet developing for a more powerful system. It was the perfect choice for Pokemon's console debut, nostalgic and reliable, while not too big or overly ambitious in scope. The result was a broadly faithful remake of Pokemon Yellow, with some Pokemon Go mechanics worked in. Some of the new ideas worked, some didn't. Pokemon wandering openly on the map was a game changer. It makes the whole world feel alive. It gives Pokemon a more active role in the world other than just appearing in battles or in towns, makes finding a particular Pokemon you're looking to catch a lot more bearable, and, best of all, it brings an end to random battles. Bless the era of random encounters. Many of my very favorite games ever feature them, but unless you have Bravely Default style sliders that you can freely adjust, I just don't need them in modern games. Riding Pokemon was a tremendous bicycle replacement. Your Pokemon clinging on for dear life or shaking a status effect out of love and loyalty gave battles some fun anime-style moments that helped them feel like more than just your soulless fighting creatures. And the catching mechanics are fine. The motion control catching was just annoying enough and just unreliable enough that I really would rather never see them again, but as a one-off in this game, it's tolerable. Annoying that you have to play on a single Joy-Con though. I like these games a lot. They look great, bright and vibrant, full of colour. While obviously much more limited in scale than the new entries of the Switch era, it does show that Game Freak can make HD games that don't feel compromised visually in some regard. Gen 1 is nothing new. It's thoroughly treaded ground at this point after seeing it originally in Gen 2, in Gen 3 remakes, and in Gen 4 remakes of Gen 2. This doesn't really reinvent the world of Kanto in ways we haven't seen before. It more brings a new flavour to a time-tested experience. It was, though, the perfect way for Game Freak to dip their toes in HD console development, and I think they stand up as real solid games. Pokemon Sword and Shield kicked off the era of discontent for Pokemon. Shortly after the announcement of the games, it was revealed that these would be the first entries in the main series without a full national dex. For the first time, every single Pokemon ever made wouldn't be playable in a new generation. This caused a lot of noise at the time, and some of which for reasons I understand. If you really love a particular Pokemon, it's a bummer that they'd be excluded from a new game in the series. The reality is though, this was inevitable. As the number of Pokemon expanded past 1,000 in the Switch era, it was increasingly unsustainable to include that many playable characters in each entry. Every time they'd want to include a new feature like Dynamax or like camping, they would need to account for over 1,000 character models, and more with each generation that comes after. Even if this dam didn't burst with Sword and Shield, even if Game Freak did backtrack, that dam would have burst eventually. Every time there's some generational leap when you need 4K or 8K or 3D or VR or whatever the hell our next technology jumps will be, accounting for every single one of those little critters in every single game would have become unmanageable. The question then becomes, of course, is the time no longer put toward cramming more and more Pokemon into each game being well spent on other features? Pokemon Sword and Shield felt like a half measure. If Let's Go was a safe choice, Sword and Shield felt more like a generational hop than a generational leap. A more open world was clearly the goal, but Sword and Shield is largely a traditional Pokemon game where you run from town to town and gym to gym, collecting badges, while the game just so happens to have a big, large open space slapped in the middle. It was cool to finally have a Pokemon game with some sense of freedom, but it felt more like a proof of concept stuffed inside a regular game than a full new reimagining of the Pokemon formula. Even solely as proof of concept, it felt a little shaky. Running around a large open area with Pokemon everywhere was cool, and felt a little novel. Having raid battles and items to find was neat. There just wasn't a ton else to really do in the wild areas. Pokemon will forever be buoyed by the fact that finding Pokemon themselves provides at least a baseline incentive to explore an open space, but it didn't feel essential to explore every corner. The DLC actually did a much better job of giving you reasons to explore those wild areas with interesting quests and story elements than the base game did. As for the rest, I find it hard to have much else to say about Sword and Shield. Dynamax and Gigantamax are fun gimmicks, and the silliness of seeing huge Pokemon is a lot of fun. Camping is a nice, if inessential, addition. The game looks solid enough, but does start to show the strain of Game Freak developing a bigger, more ambitious game. The story and characters do stand out. We can forgive a setting based on England, and the rest is just good, old, solid, reliable Pokemon. It has this big, experimental thing slapped in the middle. It kinda works, kinda doesn't, and a fairly straightforward Pokemon adventure built around it. That makes it a weird game that doesn't quite serve either master of pushing the series forward or delivering the solid Pokemon fundamentals. It sits somewhere in the middle as a reliable, if awkward, step toward Pokemon finding itself in this new era. I have a confession to make. I don't like Gen 4. I've never liked Gen 4. I'm so sorry to all the Gen 4 truthers out there. There's not enough new Pokemon, the world being built around Mount Coronet was annoying, Defog sucks. It's always been one of my least favorite generations of Pokemon. So when Pokemon Brilliant Diamond and Shining Pearl were revealed to be totally faithful remakes of their original counterparts, it couldn't have been less for me. I think there was also a little bit of disappointment for fans of the original. Rather than seeing that generation built out at least to the level of the Let's Go games, they simply added an HD veneer to the exact same original game. That's probably fine for people grabbing these games for the first time, but it's the first time that remakes haven't at least brought the games up to the standard of the existing generation, and thus doesn't give people revisiting them anything that new to see. I more slogged my way through Brilliant Diamond out of obligation, and frankly they didn't change my mind about Gen 4, I'm sorry. And I hope that the eventual Gen 5 remakes get a little more shine put into them. Pokemon Legends Arceus is the first time in arguably decades that a Pokemon game felt truly surprising. It's the first time I booted up a Pokemon game and not known exactly how everything works. Catching works differently, battles work differently, evolution works differently, status effects work differently, the game loop works differently. It felt like a breath of fresh air for a series that has been in desperate need of reinvention since Gen 6. The survival mechanics brought an honest sense of danger to the Pokemon world. When you stumbled across an alpha Pokemon, you might just get bodied right there in the middle of a field before your Pokemon could even do anything about it. That made the whole world feel way more dynamic. You weren't just waltzing your way through it as the most powerful person having a jolly time. There was a sense of excitement and occasionally dread while exploring a new area. It also has bizarrely good movement mechanics. It's frankly baffling to me that for as much as you can fault the look and variety of a lot of the open spaces Game Freak have built so far, Legends Arceus and Scarlet Violet after it really nailed the movement mechanics. By the time you get to the end of the game where you can seamlessly shift between your water, air, mountain and land ride Pokemon, the whole world opens up and becomes a delight to move around in a way that a lot of other open worlds struggle with. It creates the perfect mechanical arc where you're much more thoughtful and tentative in the early game areas, and can be much more efficient in the later game areas. I'm not sure how engaging it'll be on follow-up entries, but the framing of creating the first ever Pokédex makes catching multiple versions of the same Pokemon feel rewarding, and makes up a little for the times you repeatedly see the same Pokemon over and over again. It's not all sunshine and rainbows. While the pleasant skyboxes give the game a stronger visual personality, it still has that modern Pokemon 3D jank to how it looks. The individual sandbox areas do at least have a distinct look, but it's a lot of bland rocks and trees populating them rather than memorable things or places to come across. And as I've said already, while wandering around these spaces chucking Pokeballs at anything that moved felt like a lot of fun here, any sequel or follow-up might need to spice that up some more to stay interesting. But overall, Pokemon Legends Arceus felt exciting in a way a Pokemon game hasn't in quite some time. It felt like a Pokemon game with a real sense of vision, that really tried to take what Pokemon had been for 25 years before it, and bring that into more open spaces in ways that felt both true to Pokemon, but also new and interesting. It wasn't just trying to shoehorn open world mechanics into the traditional Pokemon experience the same way Sword and Shield was. It felt like a thoughtful reimagining of what Pokemon should be moving into an open world era, and I hope it's the template for whatever the Switch 2 era of Pokemon ends up looking like. And that brings us to Pokemon Scarlet and Violet. Let's be nice to start. The level of freedom the game provides is awesome. Being able to go to any town and any area and challenge all the gyms in any order is an incredibly ambitious level of freedom. While the lack of gyms scaling with your level depending on the order you challenge them limits just how much you can take advantage of that freedom, being able to wander into areas you're thoroughly unequipped for has a little thrill to it. It also has a lot of the same Legends Arceus joy, where just wandering the world, picking up the seemingly endless amount of items and catching Pokemon feels satisfying in its own right. In terms of a Pokemon open world game, it at least understood that freedom and wandering around catching Pokemon should be the core. Terastallizing and picnics did feel a little like rehashes of Dynamax and camping though. They felt like tacked on additions more than anything essential. And that brings us to the elephant in the room. The performance of these games was a disaster. A disaster that, while a little better now, hasn't really even been fully rectified years after release. The game is probably a little less likely to crash than it used to be, though thankfully it only crashed on me twice I think. But the pop-in and poor visual performance persists to this day. It's inexcusable for a game that sold as many copies as this did, and generated as much revenue, to have those kinds of issues. They're so lucky that the target audience for these games is probably going to be a lot more forgiving about the way Scarlet and Violet aren't up to scratch visually, but that shouldn't lower the bar for what ended up being among the better selling games of all time. And even performance issues aside, I'm just so over how 3D Pokemon games look. Legends Arceus at least had some sense of style and individuality, but Scarlet and Violet just look so bland and ordinary and devoid of nearly anything memorable. Towns take the biggest hit. They're no longer fully robust places with buildings and a sense of atmosphere. They're now shallow, empty husks with a gym plopped in them. But everything about the aesthetics of the open world, the character models, the topography, it all feels so boring. I try not to compare games too much because I have no idea what the development environment surrounding either game is like, but you can't help but look at Xenoblade Chronicles X, a remake of a Wii U game, and wonder why an open world game that's going to sell 20 times better on the same system can't at least provide the same level of detail, awe and wonder in its world. I really do hope this is an eye-opening moment for this series, that they don't just take the money, swallow it, and then be like, everything's fine, Pokemon's going better than ever. Hopefully they're giving the next generation of Pokemon the time it needs to truly shine, instead of forcing it out the door in the state that Scarlet and Violet ended up shipping in. There's a good game inside Pokemon Scarlet and Violet. Maybe a great one. They got a lot of the core stuff about freedom and exploration really right in this game, but you've got to stomach a lot of letdowns big and small to get there. You may think I've been too kind to Game Freak in this video, but video games are made by people, and I think it's important to give people the benefit of the doubt. It's exceedingly rare that people set out to deliver a lesser experience, and I am certain that the corporate machine behind Pokemon games means that there is more pressure on the release timeline of this series than nearly any other. There's a whole system of TV shows, movies, toys, trading cards, and spin-off games that we haven't even covered here that relies on this machine churning out new generations of Pokemon. But in spite of that, my prevailing feeling coming toward the end of this generation is I'm just sick of having to make compromises with each entry in the series. I'm sick of having to say, well, if you look past Scarlet and Violet's glaring shortcomings, there's actually a really fun game in there. I'm sick of being like, well, you know, it's only fair that the national decks had to come to an end eventually. I'm sick of being like, the motion capture mechanics are just the wrong side of annoying, but the rest is a lot of fun. In isolation, for each game, this would be fine. But now it seems like every time a new Pokemon game is announced, I have to hold my breath. What's the trade-off going to be this time? Will it perform well? Will the new gimmick work? We still have one more game left to release in the Switch era, and we're all going through that feeling again. I feel like there's a collective wince every time Pokemon Legends EA is shown off. That lack of faith just becomes draining. Every time there's a trailer, every time there's a new game announcement, you're like, what's it gonna be this time? Is it gonna be fine? I can't in good faith say that the Switch era has been some disaster for Pokemon. I think nearly every main entry in the series over the last 8 years has some merit, but it's that lack of confidence that really hurts. The sense of dread when a new Pokemon game comes around rather than excitement. I really hope that for whatever Pokemon looks like on Switch 2, by the time that generation comes to an end, that feeling will be gone, and I don't have to sit watching every new Pokemon trailer, waiting for what the compromise is this time. Pokemon on the Nintendo Switch gets a C-. Thank you so much for watching. Went back and forth on that final Pokemon rating, but a C- felt right in the end. Up next will be Zelda. Pretty good time on Switch, but how good? You'll have to wait and find out. You can check out the video I did on Mario already and every video I've done before that. Follow me on Twitter at GarkNEGA or ETTKDNY. Also check out the Patreon link in the description and comments. Any support would be greatly appreciated. Thanks for watching, and bye bye.